What does it mean to be a man? The question of what it means to be a man has been answered differently throughout history. The Greeks had Stoicism, which is characterized by discipline, endurance, and virtue. The Japanese had the way of the warrior, which is marked by loyalty, honor, and self-sacrifice. And today, we have folks like Andrew Tate. What does it actually mean to be manly? In today's society, mainstream voices on this topic are mostly success gurus, or other shady guys who will tell you that financial success is the end-all be-all, that you aren't worth anything until you're worth something. That's about as far as it goes for action. And as far as character and virtue, these influencers will teach you that to be a man you have to be a poor man's stoic, to speak fearlessly as opposed to truthfully. Their advice rarely goes beyond surface level ambition, and when it comes to deeper values like character or virtue, they promote a hollow version of stoicism, encouraging men to speak fearlessly in place of truthfully, and to posture rather than to be genuine. The message with these mainstream voices is clear: look strong, sound confident, and get rich. Forget integrity or holiness or truth. In fact, if I was a huge channel, I'd be willing to bargain that if any of these success gurus recognized my channel and saw my videos, they'd probably say something along the lines of, well, what color is your Lamborghini or your Bugatti? Or something else that implies that I just don't get it because I'm poor or something like that. But casting them aside, how does God define masculinity? After all, God is the one who created man, and so only He knows the purpose of His creation. And on top of this, God Himself became a man in the incarnation of Jesus Christ. So who better to ask, really? Now, before examining what Jesus teaches about masculinity, I'd like to point out just a few small ways in which hyper-masculine ideology and progressive liberal masculinity also fails. Progressive liberalism, for one, teaches that there are no real definitions of what it means to be a man, that it's merely a social construct, and there is no more responsibility on the father to fight off burglars in his own home in order to protect his wife and kids than there is on the wife to fight off the burglars in her own home in order to protect the husband and children. Now, this philosophy implies that the responsibility is equally distributed in the same way in that scenario. But this is clearly false. It's true that in almost every case, the man will be better equipped to defend his family, assuming that escaping isn't an option. Now, someone who might argue that their chances are better if both join the fight would simply be mistaken, because it's not always true. In a lot of scenarios, it would just end up in the woman getting hurt, or getting in the way, or perhaps leaving the children more vulnerable. Now, this thereby inherently makes men more responsible to fight off the aggressors in those situations. Now, of course, some women who know martial arts or just have great genetics and can strike could probably fend off aggressors. Even without those things, through sheer wit, some women could obtain victory. But that is the exception, not the rule. Progressive liberalism fails to account for the evil in the world and just how it won't give you a pass because of your modern sensibilities. The bad guy will still attack the family even if the man isn't willing or manly enough to defend it. Now, it's important to not confuse the action itself there as being the definitive answer of what it means to be manly. Similarly to the failure of masculinity from the view of progressive liberalism, hyper-masculine ideology also fails miserably. Because it's entirely performative, you always have to act a certain way, i.e. confident. Even if you don't know what confidence means, you're simply expected to act as such, even if it spills into arrogance. Where progressive liberalism fails to define any man, hyper-masculine ideology succeeds in defining the wrong kind of man, who has to posture instead of being honest, who is loud, because if he was meek, it would be a sign that he is actually weak. That was bad. A one-dimensional man who can only be one way. The Bible's answer is different from both of these philosophies, or really any philosophy's answer to masculinity. The Bible defines manliness unlike progressive liberalism, and goes beyond the one-dimensional vain and hollow man of hyper-masculine ideology. Now let me ask you, what do these three men have in common? Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, a man whose life was marked by tears and sadness. David, the king of Israel and warrior, a strong personality who'd stand out really in any crowd. And Moses, an incredibly meek man that probably wouldn't stand out in any crowd at all. What could a weeping man, a warrior king, and a meek man possibly have in common? The answer is answering God's call. See, God doesn't fail to define men like the progressive liberalism nor does he define hollow cardboard, one-dimensional vain men like hyper-masculine ideology. Instead, he shows that men are created differently. Some are more gentle and reserved, others more assertive and dominant. But these aren't things to be fixed. They're blessings that enable each man to serve the world in different ways. The unifying factor, or the manliness, comes from answering God's call. Jeremiah, though reluctant and anxious, doubting his own ability to even speak to a crowd, answered God when he called. King David, though a great king and warrior, humbled himself whenever God called in order to answer. And Moses, the meekest man on all the earth, who probably wouldn't be the first chosen to lead in modern circles, became God's great general who led God's people out from under slavery. Now Jesus is the definition of what it means to be a man. He's called the last Adam. And in Genesis, God makes man in his own image. Now Adam, whose name literally means man, failed to perfectly reflect God's image, like a torn-up coin whose image can hardly be made out. Now Jesus is the perfect Adam, or the perfect man, because he's holy and sinless, and it's God come as man. And so it's like the coin which has the perfect image and printed onto it. Now notice that Jesus doesn't look like the shapeless man in progressive liberalism, nor does he resemble the hollow one-dimensional man of hyper-masculine ideology. Like Moses, David, and Jeremiah, Jesus answers the call. He answers the deepest call to duty, the heaviest vocation, to die for the sins of the whole world. On his path to the cross, Jesus is so troubled by the sheer weight of his call that he begins to sweat out blood. But he answers the call in complete submission, saying, "Come what may." Like a lamb led to the slaughter, mighty God subjects himself to the horrors of the world in order to save us, as well as to show us what it means to be a man. It's why the great Christian theologian C.S. Lewis says, alongside the masculinity of God, we are all feminine by comparison. This implies that it takes more than personality, character, or just virtue. And that those are elements, yes, but at the core, it means to answer the call. The manliest men answer the call from God, regardless of what it may cost them. Like the 21 Coptic martyrs of Libya, the apostles, or even a man working a 7-Eleven job to provide for his family. Our calls from God may differ in scale, but in every single call is importance, because it is the creator of the universe who is making these calls. So be a man, be like Christ, the God-man, the manliest among all men, and answer God's call, whatever it may look like in your life. If you do this, then the God of all comfort will strengthen and comfort you through every affliction that comes with being a man who answers the call of God.